Hi. So I will start again. A second effort to talk with you to Budejovice here from a small city close to the Rhine in Siegburg and in Jena, where I'm teaching. And I will share now the presentation. So I hope it does. I hope it works. I think it works. I think you should see me in the small plate on the right side, and I hope that that my presentation works this way, and then we can afterwards we can discuss our my lecture. So what I want to say first is that I want to record the presentation, the lecture, so that people who are not in the room can see it afterwards. But I will not record the discussion, so that data protection is secured for any of you. So let's start. First about myself. My name is Michael Opielka. I'm professor for social policy at the Ernst Abbe University of Applied Sciences in Jena. And as well, I'm a director of a small Institute for Social Ecology in Siegburg. And I was asked to give a presentation on green social work and green social policy. And some of you may have wondered about the title of my lecture, what is green in a scientific lecture on social work and social policy. We associate green with a party political marker, and that doesn't belong at a university. Therefore, I would like to emphasize right away that I took the term from the IUW, from the International University Week stream, Green Social Work, which I want to expand into social policy, and thus implicitly assume that the organizer of the IUW did not intend party politics, but a scientific focus. Green is, according to my assumption, used as a placeholder for ecological or sustainable. You may place my cautious reconsiderations in the line of thought of the famous German sociologist Max Weber, who distinguished between ethics of conviction, Gesinnungsethik, and ethics of responsibility, Verantwortungsethik, and doubted whether there can be objectivity of social science knowledge at all. Where there can be, however, is value reflexivity, Wertreflexivität. And that's what I wanted to bring to you with these introductory remarks. We are moving into a slippery terrain where normatives and empiricism, zeal and analysis, Eifer und Analyse, quickly get mixed up. On the other hand, without zeal and normatives, also ohne Eifer und Normative, there is neither social work nor social policy. You're all familiar with the global social work statement. I hope you can see it. If there's a problem, please let me know. If you can see my PowerPoint. There's neither social policy nor social work. You're all familiar with the global social work statement of ethical principles of the International Federation of Social Workers and the General Assembly of the International Association of Schools of Social Work, the latest version of which dates back to 2018. Right at the beginning of this code of ethics, it is defined what social work actually is. I think most of you will know this definition. Social work is a practice-based profession and an academic discipline that facilitates social change and development, social cohesion, and the empowerment and liberation of people. Principles of social justice, human rights, collective responsibility, and respect for diversities are central to social work. Underpinned by theories of social work, social sciences, humanities, and indigenous knowledge, social work engages people and structures to address life challenges and enhance well-being. So this was the quotation. I could now underline the words that express obvious normatives. One could list all the many appeals in the further course of the text, such as social workers promote justice, or social workers challenge discrimination, or they must hold, or they must act, and so on. You will say, this is applied ethics, which must strike a high note, even as professional ethics. That's not science yet, but it's not that simple. Professional research has enlightened us that there is no profession without professional ethics. Only it guarantees the autonomy of professionals at the highest level of reflection, at least basic formats of professional jurisdiction. As we can see, there are strong normatives built into the social work profession itself, which aim at human rights and equality-oriented social reforms. The situation is no different in the field of social policy. Here too, I could refer to Max Weber, who emphasizes the proximity of sociology and social policy. To Ferdinand Tönnies, the author of the famous book Community and Society, who as the first president of the German Sociological Association did not regret the social reform impulse of social policy, but welcomed it. Historically, social policy has also had a tendency towards equality, towards reducing the market power of capitalism, which Gösta Esping Andersen described as decommodification, as securing life chances beyond market socialization. There's a wealth of literature on it. Now you could say, the speaker casts out the devil with a Beelzebub. Instead of soberly analyzing reality, he sees jealousy, the utopian at work everywhere. He justifies the green by the social. Well, I might argue, isn't that the case anywhere? Does the engineer simply want to accept that death rates in road traffic are high? Or does she not tend to develop seat belts and impact protection? Does the doctor simply accept that patients suffer and die from inadequate cancer medication? Or does he not tend to develop better cures, safer therapies? So, in the field of social reform, we are doing nothing other than engineers and doctors. We want to make the world a better place, more efficient, more effective, more beautiful, more pleasant, not just for a few, but for as many people as possible. And this is where the green, ecological, sustainable is expressed. Not only for people, but also for animals, biodiversity, the nature of the earth himself. I set a headline on the topic of green social work and green social policy. It is called social climate. That sounds a bit strange at first. What does the climate, what does climate change have to do with the social? First of all, it simply has to do with the fact that my book, Social Climate, was published a few days ago. initially on German, so that the non-German speaking people have nothing to gain from it. I would therefore like to refer to a recent English language article published in a Swiss journal for social policy, which also found its way into the book and can be found online. Social climate has the subtitle, "The Struggle for the Sustainability of the Social." This already makes it clear that it is a description of a field of conflict. Sustainable or green is by no means so self-evident, by no means consensus, by no means conflict-free. In one of the central chapters of the book, I approvingly discussed the memorandum by Bruno Latour and Nikolai Schulz, published in 2022, on the emergence of an ecological class. Latour uses Marxist vocabulary to argue in a radically ecological way. Both liberalism and socialism, according to Latour, were completely united in increasing material production. You see that both the book has been translated in different languages in the last year. The ecological class overturns this picture and this focus on the material production. It is the living beings of the world that make human existence possible in the first place. The production system is only a part and not even the most important of this totality. That's the argument of Bruno Latour. The ecological class can therefore no longer be defined by the mode of production. The point at which the new ecological class separates itself from all others is that it wants to reduce the position of the relations of production, while the others want to strengthen them. With the perspective of social climate, the view is changed. The consciousness is diverted. The social is part of the world context. Man is part of the earth, the world. This is not an argument against methodological anthropocentrism. We cannot blame insects for the lack of insects and species for the extinction of species politically. Biocentrism seems to me to be a cheap relief of man from his responsibility for the world. We also find this ecological decentering or recentering in the advanced sectors of social work. For example, IFSW, the International Federation of Social Workers, already makes common cause on its homepage with a document it co-initiated and supported by numerous other organizations, which was submitted to the United Nations High-Level Political Forum and General Assembly. It's called the People's Charter for an Eco-Social World, stems from 2022. It's quite recent. These movements, discourses, and documents follow on from the major movement of the so-called Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations in autumn 2015, with which shortly after the Paris Climate Summit, the international community adopted an Agenda 2030 for the next 15 years, which for the first time considered social and ecological goals together. And as you see, that the social goals are I would say, the dominant dimension. So more than half of the goals are social goals. It is now significant and professional that the United Nations has decided to subject this enormous program for the future to a complex monitoring process. Partial and complete reports are published regularly, some of which are available online, and some of which are very well worth reading. For example, the last summary report 2022 published by the United Nations. This achieves benchmarking between member states, which was of course affected by Putin's invasion of Ukraine, but not stopped. Of course, fossil energy sources have regained momentum, but the downwind is on its heels. The relationship between social and environmental goals has led to numerous initiatives in science and policy consulting that investigate the interaction between the sustainable development goals. How can target dimensions, social and ecological, reinforce each other positively instead of neutralizing each other negatively? Now, for example, so see something like that. No? Yeah, that's a big scientific question. On the example of SDG 7, affordable and clean energy, how interacts it with the other SDGs? In the field of policy consulting, Stefan Bach and myself published the DEFIS study, Climate, Environmental and Social Policy in the new legislative period, Problems and Tasks, in March 2023, which examined the relationship between the two policy fields from a social policy science perspective. In addition to the study, DEFIS, the German Institute for Interdisciplinary Social Policy Research, has also published the videos of the highly interesting workshop from June 2022, on which the study was based, and on that workshop where some of my students from Jena have worked on with as well. So, is the answer to the eco-social question, as I once called it, near? Are we moving towards a better, a good society, a realistic utopia, so to speak? Or is the picture deceptive? Does the social ecological situation actually look much more bitter than the international documents show? Aren't we actually standing on the edge of the abyss? And are the climate protests of Extinction Rebellion or Last Generation just as right as the hundreds of thousands of social demonstrators in France who were outraged by pension policy? I would therefore like to pause for a moment on my so far rather optimistic argumentation tour and investigate what the social cohesion that a turning point towards sustainability needs. Isn't reality more characterized by social division? I would like to examine this question with a European perspective and with a German focus. Certainly, the global focus would be interesting as well. What about social divisions in South America, Africa, or Asia? But you immediately suspect that you need to know a little about the societies. So we are sticking pragmatically to our last and can already see how little we usually already know about our European neighbors. And in relation to Germany, how little West knows about East Germany. Based on solid social science findings, I will argue that we have no social division in Europe, and especially in Germany. On the contrary, that social cohesion is surprisingly high. Since you were certainly expecting the opposite, I would like to add a little sugar to your doubts and fears of division. I will take an example from the Netherlands. In March 2023, quite recent, elections for the provincial parliaments were held. In the Dutch provincial elections, the populist Boer-Burger-Beweging, the rural movement, immediately became the strongest political force, winning 15 of the 75 seats in the Senate, while the coalition parties in The Hague suffered drastic losses. With the 2023 provincial elections, something like a left-wing pole of social democrats and green leftists emerging in a completely crumbled party structure. 14 parties are represented in the parliament. This may please the left and the Greens, but the crumbling of the party landscape may be worrying. But then another piece of information follows. Voter turnout in the provincial elections was 61%, the highest in 30 years. And ballots ran out at several polling stations. First of all, this means that people believe in democracy. They participate. They did not split up. But even there's water in the wine possible. For example, Bettina Kohlrausch, director of the trade union affiliated Economic and Social Research Institute WSI, recently asked, I quote, "Is there a threat of social division?" And she already sees the division. I quote, "More than 40% of the working population now stated that they had little or no confidence in the federal government. These are indicators or indications of a fundamental political alienation, which, as more complex statistical analysis show, is driven by financial worries and burdens. At the same time, there's a correlation between political alienation and the willingness to believe conspiracy narratives and or to devalue refugees from Ukraine." That's the end of the quote. Surveys on trust in French governments currently show an even more disastrous picture at the beginning of 2023. So is there any reason for concern after all? The data mentioned by Kohlrausch refer to population surveys. You must be aware that this is only one, namely the subjective perspective on social cohesion and division. On the other hand, I'll get to this in a moment, the most scientifically plausible objective ones are of no use if people see different. If you say, you're fine, but you do not feel fine, it doesn't help. It is good for you to say that you, as listeners here and now, were better off than a large part of the world's population, even as the poor students may not dispel their subjective sense of division. So let's look at the subjective perspective. At the end of 2022, a relevant text was published by one of the most renowned German sociologists of inequality, Stefan Mau, and his team. It's on the left side of what you can see here. They ask about new cleavages in Europe, and we take a quick look at the results. Against the background of new social conflict issues, the authors ask about the socio-structural foundation or a foundation of inequality attitudes. they focus on 4 axes of inequality. First, top-bottom inequalities, which focus on the economic distribution of resources. Internal, external inequalities, which relate to territorial access, migration, and membership. Us-them equalities, which address issues of us-them, which encompass societal recognition of diversity. And fourth, today-tomorrow inequalities, which address issues of intergenerational justice and environmental sustainability, the whole green field we discussed today. In each area, the authors show that the characteristics and structuring of social orientations and test common expectations in the literature. The central question is whether the attitude patterns go hand in hand with socio-structural differentiations in such a way that one could speak of cleavages, for example, lines of division. On the basis of the European Social Survey from 2016, the attitude structures are examined descriptively as well as factor and regression analytically for a selected group of 6 European countries: Sweden, France, Italy, Germany, Poland, and Hungary. The key finding is that, firstly, there is no two-dimensional attitude space in which the old economic inequalities are juxtaposed with the new inequalities. And secondly, strong cleavages can only be found selectively and not in all countries studied. These are most likely to be seen in the migration issue. That's the most controversial and most splitting field. These are undoubtedly interesting results. No one can methodologically complain. The data is, you could methodologically complain. The data is from 2016, the year of the migration crisis. The climate crisis only penetrated the public later. The Ukraine invasion is even newer, and so on. And even at the ESSS, the European Social Survey, there is nagging, albeit quietly. But if we trust our colleagues first, then we see a great deal of confusion, which is neither new. Jürgen Habermas already spoke in 1985, close to 40 years ago, of the new lack of clarity, neue Unübersichtlichkeit, and the crisis of the welfare state, as well as of the exhaustion of utopian energies. Nor surprising as a look at the helplessness of many election campaigners in most countries shows, which cannot be explained by individualization. Let's look at the second study, this time for Germany, one of Germany's most renowned inequality researchers, Stefan Radil. Together with his co-authors, he examines the question divided society, gespaltene Gesellschaft, and comes to similar conclusions. Here too I summarize the study, which is available online with very helpful data and graphs. According to the authors, current discourses also say that German society is drifting further and further apart in a threatening way. Almost half of Germans suspect that society is divided. The theory and fact-based analysis can show to what extent this debate is strongly influenced and promoted by the normative position, whether one is liberal, conservative, left or right. In addition, exaggerated. One could also say romanticizing ideals of the cohesion of a society can have a counterproductive effect in modern societies. 5 common myths are debunked by facts in the study. Societies are differentiating and becoming more heterogeneous, but this does not necessarily divide them. A few selected empirical indicators illustrate the differences between the 27 European Union countries in the extent of divisive tendencies. In Germany, compared to many other European Union countries, it is better to ensure the cohesion of society. The interim summary of the question of social division is therefore quite reassuring. However, I would like to make something explicit that is only implicitly included in the quoted text, or is at best formulated as marginal thoughts. For example, in Stefan Radil's concluding thought, how integrative the social market economy, soziale Marktwirtschaft, is. For our lecture, however, we have to deconstruct this typical German post-war construct somewhat. It is primarily about social policy and social work, as well as, but we cannot pursue this further here, about health and education as welfare state institutions. But social work also takes place in both of them, also in education and in health. So let's assume that social work and social policy in modern societies are social capital and have a socially inclusive effect without pursuing all the subtleties and contradictions. Then the question arises as to how they can contribute to a greening of society, to its social sustainability. I would like to discuss this in the last section of the lecture. It's now quite demanding. I try to break down the really complex and refer to the publications already presented at the beginning of the nuances, for the more subtle discussion. So the last section of the paper, social sustainability and social policy. First of all, we have to be aware that it's only in recent years that the social dimension of social sustainability in the sustainability discussion has become more aware of and the focus of research. Jennifer McGinn and her co-authors have vividly described the economic situation of social sustainability in the study for the European Parliament. You see that the social dimension became broader and broader discussed. So that's first point. Now maybe it's more in a balance, as McGinn and others in a study for the European Parliament have argued. But if I distinguish between 4 concepts, what I will do of social sustainability on the following, there's a sociological theory behind it, which I cannot elaborate on here. Now the distinction should be plausible on its own. The 4 conceptions of social sustainability are incorporated in a system of the theory of welfare regime, the basic structure of which was developed by Gösta Esping Andersen. I think you all have heard about him in your social policy lectures, and extended by me to include the regime type guarantism. So first of all, you look at the green line in our picture. A narrow understanding of social sustainability as social redistribution. Here, the social is conceived as one of the three pillars of sustainability, as conflict reduction and redistribution. Antagonistic or to economic sustainability, and as an accompaniment of ecological sustainability, which is at the center of this concept. In this perspective, it is more likely to assume social democratic or socialist politics, or such a regime, and thus the genesis of the third social pillar as a trade union left political program against the dominance of the liberal economic capital pillar. The discursive understanding of social thus corresponds to today's frequent use of social in the sense of vertical distributive justice. Go to the third pillar, an internal understanding of social sustainability. That's more complicated, as the sustainability of the social. This conception initially has little to do with ecology and with the concept of sustainability that is common today. It refers primarily to the social itself, to the preservation and reproduction of the communal core of a society. This understanding comes close to a conservative political or regime principle, as advocated, for example, in the so-called Freiburg School of Economics. It is about a sustainable wealth culture, for example, through the promotion of family businesses or increased foundation establishments, or about good governance, about the long-term stability of institutions. This concept builds a bridge to responsibility towards nature and the environment through the so-called commons, the common good. Air, biodiversity, water, and natural beauty are threatened by selfishness and short-term thinking. The view of the common in a concrete smaller society up to the world society includes the ecology of the social, from nature to the spiritual world heritage. In this rather conservative discourses, the term social sustainability is used to try to avoid a transformation of institutions or redistribution processes, and instead, without changing society, to protect nature immanently, internally. Third, now we get to the left pillar, a skeptical understanding of social sustainability as the sustainability of economic functionalities. This is about, for example, intergenerational justice, close to the internal understanding, but with emphasis on market control. Here, the market should be dominant. For example, in the distribution of the financial burden of pension insurance between young and old, in terms of fiscal policy, about limiting government debt, black zero, we say schwarze Null in Germany, and also about preventing a growing demand for public investment in the promotion of sustainability by taking on new state debt. In this type of liberal politics or regime, social sustainability is conceived skeptically, often with aversion or negatively. And as a positive concept, it has hardly been found in these liberal discourses so far. And finally, and we come to the fourth pillar on the right side, there's also broad understanding of social sustainability, in which the social is understood as the societal, the whole stuff for the whole society. Social sustainability is conceived here as a societal project, as a transformation project. In this arena, discussions are held about the post-growth society, about green growth, about degrowth. Social sustainability is developed in the guarantist political regime type as an umbrella concept for the sustainability discussion. The term guaranteeism needs to be explained. The classical political legitimations of liberal, socialist, conservative, for example, center, left, right, have been challenged in the recent decades by a global agenda of fundamental social rights that cannot be subordinated to this triad, to these three old patterns without further ado. There's a strong argument that democracies develop an evolutionary dynamic towards basic social rights, which are supported by appropriate policy structures. In this figure, the four conceptions of social sustainability are inserted into the systematic presentation of welfare regimes in the course of Esping Anderson. All four concepts of social sustainability include essential and future-proof aspects. As politically and normatively constructed as they are at the same time analytical concepts for investigating the control performance of social systems. The narrow understanding focuses on the socio-economic conflict that Thomas Piketty interpreted as a process of worldwide dominance of returns on capital and employee income. It is staged in the discussions about energy prices and lignite coal mining, according to which climate protection measures have a socially unequal effect and threaten to exacerbate existing disadvantages. The internal understanding, the conservative one, on the other hand, focuses on the community design options, mental changes, behavior changes, consumption changes, and technical innovations. Institutional changes are unfair to this politically rather conservative faction. The skeptical, the liberal understanding also wants to avoid institutional changes and essentially relies on technological solutions to the sustainability problem. Finally, the broad, the grantistic understanding of social sustainability could become a guiding principle of the sustainability discourse as a whole. By emphasizing the social, societal, and institutional aspects of a transformation to a more sustainable society, without being satisfied with this, it is made clear that a primarily technological, or economic strategy misses the strategic character of the socio-ecological problem. I come to an end. A broad understanding of social sustainability aims at a comprehensive reorganization of politics, as was successfully achieved worldwide in the 20th century with the idea of the welfare state and the establishment of various forms of a welfare regime. It is to be hoped that the sustainability movement, like the workers' movement before it, will succeed in demanding and promoting new institutions that systematically develop the social balancing impulse of the welfare state into a kind of an eco-welfare regime. What is the topic at stake when we talk about a broad understanding of social sustainability? Presumably, at the beginning of the 21st century, the transformative sustainability sciences fulfill a similar function as the social sciences at the beginning of the 20th century. At that time, it wasn't only sociology that saw itself as a medium of social reform and an answer to the social question as a class question. there was social work as well, starting from England, United States, and so on. The result was the welfare state. A good century later, if things go well, the eco-social question will be answered with a global eco-welfare regime. I've summarized some of the elements of a socio-ecological design of society from the spirit of a green social work and a green social policy, the concluding slide. They are not party political, but systematic. From the point of view of the individual, from the point of view of human rights, and for sustainable embedding of our actions in the whole of nature and the world. Yeah, I thank you very much for your for hearing and now for your discussion.